In this set of questions, you're being asked whether each of these four statements is always true, sometimes true, or never true. And so in order to be able to answer these, we really need to just figure out what does this normally give us and then decide the answer. So for instance, in this first one, I'm going to see a negative number divided by a negative number, and I know it says is a positive number after that, but I'm not worrying about that yet. All I'm worrying about is figuring out, okay, then what is a negative number divided by a negative number? And whenever we do multiplication or division, if the two signs of our numbers are the same, it will equal a positive. So a negative divided by a negative will equal a positive, which is what this one is claiming. It's claiming that it would equal a positive. Now, because that is a true statement, and it's always true, it's not sometimes positive, sometimes negative, it's always positive, then we will then answer this one as always true. And then we can go on to the next one. So the next one says a negative number divided by a negative number. And so before I even worry about where it's going with it, I first figure out, okay, what's that going to be? Well, this is actually the same starting statement as what we had in the last one. Well, we already talked about how a negative divided by a negative should always equal a positive. In this case, it's saying, when will it equal a negative? Well, it never equals a negative. It always equals a positive. And therefore, this one can be never true. All right, and then we go on to our next one. In our next one, we have a negative number times a negative number this time. Well, multiplication and division share all the same rules when it comes to positives and negatives. So the question about what we get from a negative times a negative will actually be the same as what we get when we do a negative divided by a negative. Both of those cases, a negative times a negative gives you a positive. All right, now what's it claiming? It's claiming that it would actually equal a positive, which then it is the case, and therefore this would be always true. And then finally, we get to our last one here, which is no longer just going to be negative, negative. These will vary dramatically. It just happened that in our first three of these, all the questions started off with a combination of negative and negative. So our last one here is saying a positive number times a negative number. Okay, so a positive times a negative, I know from previous work that that should always give me a negative. Okay, so then let's see what it's claiming. It's claiming that it will be a negative. Well, that is what I expected it to be. That's what I said it should be. A positive times a negative is in fact a negative. Therefore, this one will be always true. Now, you might be wondering at this point, okay, but then what would make something sometimes true? Because none of these ended up being sometimes true. Well, that's because whenever we're dealing with multiplication and division, all the rules are consistent. It doesn't matter what numbers you're choosing. It only matters what the signs are on them for what the sign of your answer will look like. And so when we're dealing with multiplication and division, like these questions were, all your answers will always have to be either always true or never true.